Yesterday should have ended with laughter, a final toast, a sleepy flight home to Portland with my boyfriend Chris, but instead, I froze in the middle of a hotel room in San Diego, staring at a number that made my heart drop. $9,200. Gone. Just gone. I had just opened my banking app to pay the hotel bill. That was the only reason I even looked. Chris was... My voice cracked as I held up my phone. He was packing his suitcase, but he turned around immediately. What is it? My account, my savings, it's gone. He stepped closer, confused until he saw the screen. Then he stopped breathing too. Olivia, what the hell? There was over $10,000 in my account 3 days ago. I had checked before my little brother's wedding. I always check. But now just $985 remained. Chris grabbed the phone and pulled up the transaction history, already switching into lawyer mode. What the? 3 large transfers, all from last night. $3,000 to a credit card under the name Lacey Walker, my older sister. $2,500 to Travis Walker, her husband. $3,700 to Margaret Morgan, my mother. All approved around 11 to 43 p.m., all while I was in the shower getting ready for bed. I didn't do this, I said, the words barely making it past my lips. Someone got into your account, Chris said, jaw tight. We need to call the bank, right now. Just as he said that, my phone rang. It was my mom. I stared at it. The timing was eerie. Chris and I looked at each other. Then I picked up. Olivia, sweetie. Her voice was chipper casual. I just wanted to say thank you again for yesterday. Zach was so happy. You looked beautiful. Mom, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you take money from my account? There was a pause. Then she laughed. Oh, that. Yeah, it was actually less than we thought you'd have. I couldn't speak. My mouth was open, but no sound came out. Lacey said you'd saved up quite a bit, Mom continued. So we figured we'd just split some of it, for the wedding. Travis's credit card was maxed, and I needed to help cover the reception tip. It's not a big deal. Not a big deal. My voice trembled. Chris moved closer, and I put the call on speaker. That's theft, I said quietly. You didn't even ask me. Oh, don't be dramatic. My mom's tone turned sharp. We're family. And honestly, Liv, you always act like your money is only yours. But you're single. You have a good salary. Of course you should help out. Chris cut in. This is Olivia's boyfriend, Chris. I'm an attorney, and what you've done is illegal. You accessed her financial account and transferred money without consent. That is a crime. Oh, great, my mom snapped. The lawyer. Stay out of family matters, will you? She hung up. I stood there staring at the phone in my hand, feeling like I'd just stepped into a nightmare. Chris slowly reached for my hand. I was shaking. We're going to your parents' house, I said, my voice low. I want to hear it from them directly. He didn't argue. The car ride was silent. My pulse thudded in my ears. I felt like I was driving towards some warped version of reality where people I loved had turned into strangers with access codes. 30 minutes later, we pulled up to my childhood home. I didn't wait for Chris to knock. I marched up to the front porch and rang the bell. Nicholas, my dad, opened the door. Oh, Olivia, he said, surprised. I thought you two left this morning. I walked right past him into the living room. Lacey was on the couch next to Travis. My mom sat across from them, drinking tea like it was any other Saturday afternoon. They all stopped talking when they saw me. I looked straight at Lacey. How did you get into my account? She shrugged. You always use the same password. You left your phone unlocked in the bathroom. It wasn't hard. I stared at her. And you didn't think maybe I should have consented before you took nearly $10,000. Travis leaned back on the couch, arms folded. Relax, we needed it. You live alone in a nice apartment, you travel, you don't have kids. We've got responsibilities. I could feel my hands curling into fists. This wasn't just about money. It was the entitlement. Don't try to justify this, I said through gritted teeth. You stole from me. Mom waved a hand like she was brushing away a fly. Olivia, stop. Don't make this into a scandal. We're your family. We borrow. We lend. It's natural. Chris stepped forward. This was not borrowing. It was accessing a private account. And it is a crime. My dad finally spoke, not even looking up from the newspaper. Young man, don't bring the law into family matters. Something broke inside me. It was quiet, but it cracked deep. I wasn't a daughter. Not in this room. I was an ATM. Let's go. Chris whispered, gently touching my back. As I turned to leave, Lacey called out behind me. Don't be so dramatic. With your job, you'll earn that back in no time. We needed it more than you. I turned. She actually believed that. Not even a flicker of shame. I want nothing to do with any of you, I said. Don't ever contact me again. Back in the car, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I gripped the steering wheel and cried. Chris rubbed my back in silence. Olivia, he said quietly. What they did, it's not just wrong. It's a felony. I didn't answer because I already knew. But knowing and believing, those are two different things. We left the house without saying another word. I didn't look back. I couldn't. Chris drove. I stared out the window, watching the streets of San Diego blur past like I wasn't really there. My thoughts kept circling the same dark center. They were never supposed to tell me. They weren't sorry. They weren't even hiding it. I'd been nothing more than a resource. And the second I found out, they acted like I was the villain. When we got back to the hotel, I sat on the bed and pulled my knees to my chest. Chris paced the room. He was angry, but not loud. His anger had a sharp edge to it. Cold, controlled. Liv, he said finally, you need to report this. To who, I asked numbly. The bank? The police? You name it. This is fraud. This is theft. It doesn't matter that it's your family. But that's the thing, I whispered. It is my family. I knew Chris was right. Every part of me knew it. But I couldn't shake the ache inside me. The ache that said, this isn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to love you. I thought back to all the little moments, Lacey's calls, asking for a little help, when she was short on rent. Mom's casual mentions of borrowing a few hundred to help with a dentist bill. Dad's silence whenever I offered to pay for groceries during holidays, never once telling me not to. And I thought I was being generous. I thought I was helping. Turns out I was just easy prey. The next morning, Chris woke up early and made a few calls. By the time I showered and got dressed, he was already sitting at the desk with a laptop and a stack of notes. I talked to a colleague, he said. Sonia Chen, she specializes in financial crime. She's handled a few cases just like this. Just like this, I said, incredulous. You'd be surprised how often it happens, especially to women in your position, single high earning, the responsible one. Families see it as an open vault. I sat beside him. She says the most important thing is documentation. Chris continued, we need to gather everything, bank records, messages, emails, any prior transfers. So that's what we did. For the next 4 hours, I combed through my online banking account, year by year, month by month. Each entry brought a memory. Each gift or loan felt like a breadcrumb, leading me back to a truth I hadn't wanted to see. In the last 18 months alone, I had sent them over $15,600 for Harry's iPad, $1,200 for Margaret's dance school fees, $2,800 toward their mortgage just this once. And every single time there was guilt. Pressure. If you really loved your niece, think of your sister's kids. You don't need it as much as we do. Chris sat across from me, quiet, steady, but I could tell even he was shocked. This wasn't help, I said. This was manipulation. It was all one-sided. It's exploitation, Chris said. And the $9,200 wasn't the first time, it was just the first time they didn't ask. He was right. They hadn't even planned to tell me. If I hadn't checked my bank app, I wouldn't have known. And that realization, it changed everything. Later that afternoon, Chris called Sonia again, and she agreed to meet with us that evening. She greeted us with a warm but firm handshake. Short, sharp bob haircut, blazer, the kind of woman who looked like she didn't miss a single detail. Olivia, she said, this is a classic pattern of familial financial abuse. Just because they're your family doesn't give them immunity. In fact, it makes it worse. I feel guilty, I admitted, like I'm tearing my family apart. Sonia gave me a steady look. If your boyfriend were robbed by a coworker, would you tell him to just let it go? No. And what if the thief was his own mother? I hesitated. It doesn't matter who they are, she said. A crime is a crime. You have the right to draw a boundary. I nodded slowly. Her words didn't make the pain disappear, but they made the truth clearer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and Chris breathing beside me. I wasn't just grieving lost money. I was grieving illusion. The illusion that family meant protection, that love was unconditional, that blood couldn't betray. The next day, we visited the local branch of my bank to formally report the unauthorized transfers. The fraud department agent listened, asked questions, filed a report. Then came the hardest part, calling my little brother Zach. He'd just gotten married. He was probably packing for his honeymoon. But I needed answers, and I needed to know if he was part of this too. He picked up on the third ring. Olivia, he said, sounding surprised. I thought you were already on the flight. Zach, I said, I need to talk to you. Something in my tone must have alarmed him. Yeah, what's wrong? Did you know about the money, the $9,200 taken from my account? There was a long silence. Zach, I didn't know the exact amount, he said quietly. But I knew they were planning something. Lacey and Mom were whispering about it at dinner. I told them not to involve me. I thought if I stayed out of it, it wouldn't be my problem. I closed my eyes. Of course he knew. I'm sorry, Olivia. I didn't think they'd actually do it. I just wanted the wedding to go smoothly. I took a breath. My voice was calm but firm. They stole from me, and I'm taking legal action. You didn't stop it, but you can still do the right thing now. If it goes to court, I'll need you to tell the truth. He didn't answer right away, but when he finally did, his voice was low and shaken. Okay, I hung up and stared at the screen. Chris touched my hand. How do you feel? Like I've just set fire to the only bridge I had left, I said, but I think it needed to burn. Back at our apartment in Portland, the silence was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that throbbed, like something in the air had cracked. I stood in the kitchen holding a mug of tea I'd forgotten to drink. My hands felt too still, my body too heavy. Chris sat at the table flipping through documents. Here, he said, sliding a printout toward me. This is everything you pulled from your bank. Chronological order, past 3 years. The list was longer than I expected. Pages and pages of transfers, some labeled with names. Others with vague descriptions, gift school fund emergency. There were patterns. Every 6 months, a new request, a different excuse, a sudden need. Every time I'd said yes, maybe with hesitation, but still yes. I used to think that made me generous. Now I wasn't sure it didn't just make me easy. Chris pushed another folder across the table. This one had notes from Sonia, our legal options categorized by offense, unauthorized access, digital fraud, financial abuse. Olivia, Chris said, leaning forward. This is real. It's not just a bad memory or a mistake. What they did is criminal. I nodded, slowly, mechanically. Then I looked up at him. If a stranger stole $9,200 from your account, would you call the police? He raised an eyebrow. Of course. And if that stranger was your mom, I asked. He hesitated, then nodded again. It wouldn't change what happened. I looked back down at the list. My name, my money, tied to everything from orthodontist bills to mortgage payments to a $1,600 wedding cake. I'd paid for all of it, and they still acted like it wasn't enough. There was one payment that hit me harder than the rest. $750 for a smartwatch for Travis. I remembered seeing him wear it at the wedding. I thought it looked familiar. I paid for that, I said out loud. Chris looked up. Travis's watch. I bought it. Without even knowing. I laughed, but there was no joy in it. They're probably still wearing the things I bought them, while telling each other I'm selfish. Chris stood and came over to me, crouching beside my chair. Listen to me, he said. You're not selfish. You've been exploited, over and over. And now that you've finally said no, they're punishing you for drawing a line. I swallowed. But they're my family. He nodded. And that's exactly why it hurts more. But think about this. Who should protect you? Who shouldn't lie or steal from you? I didn't answer, because I already knew. That evening, Sonia called to check in. Her tone was calm, professional, but kind. I've drafted the first complaint, she said. Once we file the Financial Crimes Division, we'll conduct a preliminary investigation. They'll interview involved parties, freeze suspicious accounts, possibly issue subpoenas. My throat tightened. Will they be arrested? It depends. If it's a first offense and they cooperate, it could lead to probation and restitution. But the process has to start. I felt my heart pounding. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Chris sat beside me, his hand wrapped around mine. I want to do it, I said. I want to go forward. Sonia paused, then said warmly, You're doing the right thing, Olivia. I know it doesn't feel like it, but trust me, this is how you take your life back. The next morning, the formal complaint was filed. The very same day, my phone exploded. 15 missed calls, dozens of texts, all from my family. Lacey, Olivia, what are you doing? They said our accounts might be frozen. I can't pay. Harry's tuition, are you really doing this over some money? Mom, what have you done? The police came to the house. What will the neighbors think? You're bringing shame to this family. Withdraw the report immediately. Your father says his chest is tight. He could collapse. Dad, no words, just a photo. The living room ransacked, drawers open. A handwritten note. Are you happy now? I stared at the screen, shaking. Chris watched me closely. What are you going to do? I took a breath and typed. Reply to all that's your own doing. I'm not going back to being the person who let herself be used. I hit send, then I turned off my phone. That afternoon, there was a knock at my apartment door. When I opened it, Lacey was standing there. Her eyes were red makeup smudged. She looked like she hadn't slept. Olivia, she said, almost a whisper. Why are you doing this? I didn't answer right away. If you want to talk, I said calmly, I'll call Chris. We can have the conversation with him present. Oh, I knew it, she snapped. It's him. He's the one controlling you now. You used to care about your family. I still do, I said, voice shaking. But caring about you doesn't mean I should be okay with being stolen from. She stepped forward. We didn't steal. We asked for help. We needed it more than you. Now Nicholas might lose his job. Mom's a mess. You've destroyed everything. I stared at her. Have I thought about Harry and Margaret? I repeated, my voice rising. Have I thought about you? I've always thought about everyone else. But tell me, did any of you think about me when you took my money? When you used my phone? When you lied? Her face paled. You've changed, she whispered. I didn't flinch. Damn right I've changed. Because I'm done being used. She left without another word. Later that night, I stood by the window in silence. Chris came up behind me and wrapped his arms around me. You okay? He asked softly. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm starting to feel like maybe I will be. 3 days after filing the complaint, I got a call. It wasn't a number I recognized, but I knew the voice the second it spoke. Olivia. My father's voice was low, tired. What are you doing? He asked. The question hung in the air, sharp, brittle. The police searched the house. He continued. They took my laptop. Your mother is panicking. Your sister won't stop crying. Nicholas got suspended from work. And now the bank's talking about freezing our mortgage account. Is that what you wanted? I didn't speak right away. Then I said clearly, this is the consequence of what you did. Not me. There was silence, then a deep exhale. You're no longer our daughter. His words came out cold, like a closing door. You betrayed this family, and you're not welcome back. The line went dead. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the wall phone still in hand. Chris walked in. He saw my face and didn't ask. He just pulled me into his arms. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something inside me broke and rebuilt itself at the same time. Later that evening, Sonia called. She had updates. Olivia, she said, Amelia and Travis Walker have officially been charged with unauthorized access and financial theft. Your parents are still under investigation for conspiracy, but at this point, the prosecution has insufficient evidence for criminal charges. I nodded, trying to absorb it all. There will be a preliminary hearing next week, she continued. We've also requested a temporary restraining order. The judge will likely grant it. I thanked her, my voice barely audible. Chris placed a hot mug in front of me. Tea, he said. You're shaking. I wrapped my hands around the cup and stared down into the steam. They disowned me, I whispered. Chris didn't flinch. You didn't destroy the family, he said. They did that the moment they chose to betray you. He was right, but it still hurt like hell. The next morning, as I walked out of my building to head to work, I saw a figure leaning against the brick wall. It was Lacey. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were swollen, her expression almost feral. What do you want? I asked, staying a safe distance. You need to fix this, she said through clenched teeth. The police came again. They questioned Travis in front of the kids. They froze our account. We can't even buy groceries. Not my problem, I said. Not anymore. She stepped closer. Have you even thought about what this is doing to Mom, to Dad, to Zach? You're tearing the family apart. No, I said you did that. When you stole from me. When you laughed in my face and told me I'd make it back in no time. Lacey was breathing hard now. I didn't think you'd go this far, she spat. You're not who you used to be. You're right, I said calmly, because who I used to be would have kept quiet, but not anymore. She stormed off without another word. That night, Zach showed up at our door. He looked different, pale, worn, but honest. I heard, he said. I nodded. Let him in. I didn't want to believe it would come to this, he said, sitting down. But I can't ignore what they did, and I can't ignore that I let it happen. Zach, I started. No, he cut me off. Don't protect me. I knew they were planning to take something. I didn't know it would be that much. I didn't know it would be like this. But I knew they were scheming, and I said nothing. He rubbed his face with both hands. I was scared. Scared to ruin the wedding. Scared to lose them. But you lost them anyway, and you stood your ground. I didn't respond. He looked at me, eyes watery. I want to help. If there's a hearing, I'll testify. I'll tell them the truth. My throat tightened. Are you sure? I asked. They already hate me for talking to you, he said. Might as well do the right thing. Chris placed a hand on Zach's shoulder. Thank you, he said simply. The day of the preliminary hearing, I walked into the courthouse in a dress I hadn't worn in years. It didn't matter what I looked like, but something about dressing with intention made me feel grounded. Across the room, Lacey and Travis sat stiffly beside their lawyer. My mother was behind them, staring straight ahead. My father didn't show. Zach arrived 10 minutes later. He nodded at me, then walked over to the other side. Alone. When the judge asked if there were any witnesses willing to make a statement, Zach stood. I am, he said. And then he spoke, clearly, slowly. He told them what he knew, the conversations he overheard, the things Lacey and our mom said, the way they acted like it was normal. It was the first time I'd ever seen Zach look like the older brother, like the protector. When he finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge looked over the evidence. Sonia submitted bank statements, login logs, screenshots of messages, the signed complaint from my bank's fraud division. I'm granting the request for a temporary restraining order, the judge said. Amelia and Travis Walker are formally charged. A trial date will be set within 60 days. My heart pounded. As we walked out of the courthouse, I felt a pair of eyes on me. I turned. Lacey. Her expression wasn't just angry anymore. It was afraid. She knew. She finally understood. This wasn't a warning shot. This was justice. That evening, Chris took me out to dinner at a quiet restaurant just outside the city. We sat under warm lights, surrounded by quiet conversation and soft jazz. His parents were there too. They'd driven in from Eugene to see us. When I hugged Estella, his mom, she held on a little longer than I expected. You're part of our family now, she said gently. My eyes filled with tears. Family means taking care of each other, she continued. Not taking from each other. I nodded, unable to speak. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without waking up gasping. I was still grieving, still healing, but I wasn't alone, and I wasn't ashamed. Not anymore. A few days later, as I was leaving work, I found someone waiting outside the building. It was Zach. His hands were in his pockets, and he looked like he hadn't slept much, but his shoulders were squared like a man who'd finally chosen where he stood. I heard the trial date's been set, he said. I nodded. Olivia, I just wanted to say again, thank you for not shutting me out, for giving me a chance to do the right thing. You did more than that, I replied quietly. You stood up when it counted. That means everything. He gave me a small smile, then stepped back. Whatever happens, I'm here. After he left, I walked the few blocks home and opened the mailbox in our building lobby. Among the usual junk mail and bills was a cream-colored envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Inside was a letter. Dear Olivia, you probably don't remember me. I'm Marty Daniels Travis's cousin. We met at a couple of family reunions years back. I heard what you did, and I just want to say thank you. I've been in a similar situation. My parents used my credit to open accounts. My brother took loans in my name, and when I tried to stop them, they said I was selfish. They called me heartless, but hearing your story gave me something I didn't realize I'd lost: permission. Permission to stand up, to say no, to say enough. What you did, that was brave. That was love. You showed that protecting yourself doesn't make you cruel. It makes you strong. Thank you, truly. Marty, I stood in the elevator reading it again and again, the words blurring behind tears. This wasn't just about me anymore. What happened, what they did, it wasn't isolated. It was a pattern too many people quietly endured because they were told that family means sacrifice, but love without respect. That's not family. That's emotional blackmail, dressed in Sunday dinner clothes. 2 weeks before the trial, Chris surprised me. He drove us out of the city up to a lakeside spot I didn't even know existed. It was golden hour, the lake shimmering in soft amber light breeze, warm against my cheeks. We walked along a wooden dock where a small table was set with candles and 2 plates. "What is this?" I asked, smiling despite the nerves in my chest. "Dinner," Chris said, squeezing my hand. "To celebrate you." We sat, we ate, we laughed, and just as the sky turned from gold to lavender, Chris stood. Then he dropped to one knee. I stopped breathing. "These past few months, I've watched you walk through fire," he said. "I've seen you break, rebuild, and come back stronger. You didn't just stand up for yourself, you stood up for what's right." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it. Inside, simple, elegant, shining. "Olivia Morgan, will you marry me?" Tears rolled down my face. Not from sorrow, from relief, from release. From hope. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "Yes." He stood and kissed me, and the world finally felt light. We returned home to news from Sonia. Trial date is confirmed. Amelia and Travis will appear next week. I expect the prosecution to pursue full restitution and potentially a suspended sentence. Based on their prior record, prison time is unlikely, but accountability is still accountability. I nodded. That night, I received one last message from my father. "Anna, your actions have destroyed this family. Your mother can't sleep. Your sister is sick with stress. Our name is in the hands of lawyers and strangers. You should be ashamed." I stared at the message, then deleted it. I had no more space for shame, only truth. The morning of the trial, I dressed in navy blue, simple, sharp. Zach met us at the courthouse. Sonia stood beside us, calm and ready. Inside, Amelia and Travis sat quietly, their attorney whispering to them. They looked smaller. When the judge entered, we all stood. The case was read aloud. The charges: unauthorized digital access, financial theft, emotional damages. The evidence was presented: the bank's fraud report, login logs, transfer timestamps. Zach's testimony officially submitted under oath. My own statement. When asked how they pled, Amelia whispered, "Guilty." Travis followed. Their attorney requested leniency, citing financial stress, 2 children, and no prior criminal record. The judge reviewed everything carefully. Then he spoke. For the crimes of unauthorized access and financial theft, the defendants are sentenced to 3 years probation. Amelia slumped in her seat. Travis closed his eyes. They are also ordered to repay $9,200 to the victim, the judge continued, as well as $5,000 in damages for emotional distress. And then something I didn't expect. The court issues a 5-year restraining order against both defendants, prohibiting any contact with the victim, direct or indirect. I exhaled for the first time in months. My lungs filled fully. We walked out of the courthouse into pale morning light. The air crisp, clean. Chris took my hand. "You okay?" I nodded. "I'm okay now." Later that week, I received a follow-up letter from Sonia. The court had confirmed that Amelia and Travis's assets were being evaluated for liquidation to repay the debt. Their accounts had been frozen. Nicholas's employer had formally terminated his position due to the conviction. Their house might be next. For a brief second, I felt something tug at my chest. Not guilt, grief maybe, for what could have been. Then Chris's words came back. "This is the result of their actions, not your fault." He was right. That evening, as we sat on our balcony, wine in hand, the city humming below us, I said, I didn't just take back my money, I took back myself. Chris smiled. No one can ever steal that again. 60 days passed after the trial. The deadline for repayment came and went. Then the enforcement orders kicked in. We heard from Sonia first. Collections have begun, she said. Amelia and Travis's accounts have been frozen. Assets are being seized. Vehicles, electronics, discretionary property. The court is making sure the victim you is compensated. Chris sat beside me, scrolling through emails. Looks like Nicholas officially lost his job, he added. Internal policy. They can't employ someone with a financial crime conviction. I nodded slowly. And the house, still under review, Sonia replied. But with their mortgage unpaid and accounts frozen, foreclosure is likely. I leaned back on the couch, eyes closed. I didn't feel triumphant, but I didn't feel broken either. There was no joy in their suffering, but there was a kind of peace in knowing that consequences existed. That justice wasn't just an idea, it was real. It could be enforced. That weekend, we went to a quiet breakfast spot near Forest Park. A new favorite, one of those places with giant windows and honey-colored wood tables. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed. A name I hadn't seen in a while, Marty Daniels. She'd sent me an email, subject line, "Thank you again, Olivia. Just wanted you to know, thanks to you, I'm finally free of my brother. I stopped sending him money last month. He told me I was dead to him, and for the first time, it didn't destroy me. I know you're still dealing with the fallout from your own case, but I needed you to know your story gave me strength. You weren't just fighting for yourself. You were fighting for people like me too. Thank you." Marty, I stared at the screen, my heart aching in the best way. This wasn't just self-defense. This was impact. This was legacy. Later that night, Chris and I sat on the floor of our living room, sorting through old photos, ones I'd stored in boxes and hadn't opened in years. I held up a picture of me and Lacey from college. We were laughing, her head thrown back, my hand over my mouth. I used to think that moment was pure, I said quietly. Chris leaned over, glancing at it. It probably was, he said, before everything else. I wish we could go back, I whispered. But we can't, he said gently. And honestly, maybe that's okay. He reached into his own box and pulled out a small photo album. Inside, pictures of us. Hiking, cooking, laughing in terrible lighting. A new kind of family, ours. A few weeks later, we visited Chris's parents in Eugene. Estella met me at the door with open arms. "I made your favorite," she smiled. "Lemon chicken. And yes, there's enough for leftovers." We laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't cost anything, the kind that heals. After dinner, we walked through their backyard, fireflies blinking under the trees. Chris took my hand and pulled me aside. "I want to ask you something," he said, eyes steady. I tilted my head. "I know we're planning the wedding," he continued, "but before that, I want to do something different." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a property listing, a small cabin near the coast. "We can't afford a mansion, but we can afford this. Somewhere quiet, ours, a place to start something new." Tears pricked my eyes. "Yes," I whispered. "Let's build something from scratch." Later that night, we sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, wine glasses in hand. And for the first time in years, I felt safe. Not because I was protected from pain, but because I had chosen to protect myself. Because I had drawn a line and refused to be pulled back. The people who love you will never make you choose between your dignity and their comfort. I lost a family I thought was real, but I gained a life that is, and that is more than enough.